Well, thank you, everyone. And I'd like to thank the DC section here for inviting me to give the SMPTE welcome. That's my first time at BITS by the Bay, so I'm really looking forward to the program. Thank you very much for that. So, I hope that most of you know by now that SMPTE is almost 100 years old. And our executive director loves to have little quips, and Barbara Lang. And so she's calling SMPTE the 100-year-old startup, which will become very clear why she calls it that as I go through the presentation today. Except it's not doing what Peter said it was supposed to do. So I'm going to click on here.
I move the mouse to advance.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, great. So, as I hope you know, SMPTE is a leader in the advancement of the art and science and craft of the image, sound, and metadata ecosystems. And what it really comes down to is our members really care about the quality of motion images to deliver the best quality image and sound to the consumer, no matter what the device be on, whether it's a television, a cinema screen, or a mobile device. And these are the areas that we're growing into here. So as we approach 100 years, we'll be 100 years in 2016. It should take some time to take a look at who started SMPTE or how SMPTE started and look forward to where we're coming from in order to figure out to where we're going to. So it all started in 1916. This was a time of the Industrial Revolution and innovation in our industries. Inventors were everywhere. Of course, patent office, they said everything that needed to be invented was invented well before this time. It was in the late 1800s when they said that. But at this point in time, things that we take for granted today were just being put into execution. Things as pervasive as electricity. We take it for granted. That's not something simple like a milk carton. They didn't have milk cartons back then, right? And a lot of the work that was done that for the foundations of our the motion picture and television industries was being innovated during this time. So take a look at some of this stuff for here. One of the things that happened in the beginning was the art of the direction of things, actors and creators and cinematographers. You just couldn't create things. You had to actually be an engineer at the same time almost. So the technology itself was woven very closely with the art itself because there were no ways or defined ways of doing things. And this was all over the world. Everybody was working on very similar things. The concept of having moving pictures was not that old back in 1960, and the idea that you could actually put sound with the pictures was pretty novel back then as well. So one of the areas, of course it's always things that get driven by it, is the fact that people want to document history. And before this time, there was, as you know, most things were documented was still film photography because that's all that was available. So it was pretty exciting back then, even the basis of it, to have a moving pictures capture thing. And of course, as a statement of human history, take it for what it's worth, one of the major drivers of documenting stuff was World War I and the activities that happened there. But here's the issue. 2 different cameras, 2 different display devices, none of them were the same. Everybody created their own and they shot with it. You can go in the field with 2 different cameras, 2 different cameramen. You go back to try to splice it together, you can't line them up. There were no standards for motion imaging, even to display it. Even if you'd had it shot on a common film, you might be able to display it in one theater, but not in another. There simply was no interoperability at all. And so the U.S. government, of course, came in, as I mentioned before, for World War I and said, we need to fix this. This is a new industry. We need to do something about that. So one of the big inventors back in that time was Charles Francis Jenkins. And he was one of the geniuses back then. At the time, he had well over 400 patents to his name. And he was really working on developing moving pictures, moving images, and that's where his area of focus was. Hard to believe, though, that he was thinking about television as a means to deliver stuff. In 1913, he published an article called Motion Pictures by Wireless. Now, that name sounds funny to us today, because when you think of wireless, what are you thinking? Your little handhelds. But think about it. What is television or stuff being delivered to now? Little handhelds. But back then, anything that was delivered without cables attached to it, of course, was wireless. So he published this article as early as 1913, but it wasn't really until 1923, 10 years later, that he actually had witnesses see the transmitting of moving silhouette images along with synchronized transmission of sound. He was granted a U.S. patent back then, and if you want to know the patent number, I have it. It's 1544156. But it's transmitting pictures over wireless. How simple of a patent name. How many people in this audience have patents? Yeah, and I do as well. Is any of your patents have that simple of a title on it? Their patent titles have grown over the years. But anyways, it was filed in 1922 and issued in 1925, which basically the delivering of a system for doing that. And there are other great inventors back in that time, the inventor of television being Bain and a few other people that are around their history. I'm sure that Mark Shubin's going to get into a little bit of that tomorrow. So the U.S. government stepped in because as visionary as Jenkins was, he had some contemporaries around the time that were also visionaries. You've heard names like Thomas Armat or Thomas Edison. They all were visionaries. And can you imagine putting 3 engineers and visionaries in the room together and they might not quite agree on something? I can't believe that. That doesn't happen today, right? You put engineers in the room, they don't disagree. So the U.S. government stepped in and basically said, look, I need you, Mr. Jenkins, to lead your colleagues to work together. We have to have standards for the motion picture industry so that we can document government events for that. And that's really how the society, and you can see the first logo here, it was Society of Motion Picture Engineers. Shouldn't be a surprise to you. Pretty clever, it looks like a film container, right? Logo in there, very clever people at the time doing that. So in 1916, when SMPTE was formed, it was specifically done for standards. And actually, at the first organized meeting of SMPTE, the U.S. Department of Standards, the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Standards actually physically came to the meeting and said, we need you to develop industry standards. Please get together and have things work. Simple things like the length of a size of a sprocket to put the film in. None of that was standardized. The size of the film, everything. Stuff that we take for total granted today. And it was all done by volunteers back then. Just like 100 years later, if you've had the pleasure of going to a SMPTE standards meeting, it's all volunteers. That's the fundamental part of our organization is volunteerism. So if you take a look, and you can get access to the SMPTE Journal Archive, this is one of the first reports that we can go back through our archives. And this was reported to the Committee of Optics to the Society of Motion Picture Engineers. You get in here, and it talks all about a listing of the very first standards in this area, and this is from 1917. And you do have access to this stuff as a SMPTE member. So just like it was today, the society was a very important place for people to gather and learn and stuff on it. We have some very famous SMPTE members on that, Walt Disney being one. Articles were written in the Motion Imaging Journal by Walt Disney himself in forwarding different aspects of this. We also had the head of Technicolor, Herbert Kalmus, was very active in that. And you might not, and it's not all about engineers, even though the title's engineers. Remember I told you, technology and art were very much mixed back then. So Cecil D. DeMille, these are all active members of SMPTE. And you know, it's not unusual, just like today, that we have members that come from traditional space and studios and broadcasters, but also we do attract people in the craft of storytelling itself. So I don't know if everybody in this room is a SMPTE member, but I hope you are. And you can, these are their forebears. These are the people that made SMPTE famous. Television, all it's about. So by the 1940s, television was starting to take shape, and it shouldn't be a surprise to you that the experts in the motion picture industry would take a liking to television or be interested in it because it's related in a lot of aspects, right? And a very new, exciting area. So things that also we take for granted, there was no standards for, something as simple as color bars that you see in here. These are SMPTE color bars. We have a standard for this. And there's other patterns as well that SMPTE has produced for that. And moving beyond that, Jenkins dabbled in that, and then we decided at the 1950s, the T was added to SIPI, so to speak, and it became SMPTE. And our first logo on the left, you can see on there the sprockets of a projector overlaid with film in the middle of it, but with a cathode ray tube in the background to show that it's television. And then later on, our modern logo moved from will be the analog film coming in to the left, out digitization on the right, and that's what's represented by bits on that. So some of the other areas that we got to work on indicated standing, like I talked about the color bars. We have time code. SMPTE time code is probably one of the most indelible aspects. It impacts everything through timing in the studio that we have right now. And very, very basic things that we take for granted. But again, without SMPTE, they wouldn't have existed. So we really have SMPTE is divided into three pillars. We have membership, education, and standards. So pretty much everything that we talk about is in terms of that. You're here today at a conference that is clearly part of the education, which is a very important pillar. Membership, the social access, birds of a feather flock together. That's the other major function of a section such as a DC section. And standards, of course, which is the foundation of the society, continues with today. So SMPTE's membership has ebbed and flowed over the years. Today we have well over 6,000 members from around the world in 60 countries, and there's 27 sections highlighted with the blue dots. Now we obviously would like to grow the society, and the concentration, even though it's a worldwide organization, there's obviously more members in the United States than elsewhere, and we'd like to see that change and move forward. So we have areas to grow in, and a couple of areas where there's a lot of innovation in the world. We have some sections in, but not as much. We'd like to grow in areas such as China, India, and Brazil. And we are making active efforts to grow the society around the world. One of the areas is you might see some non-traditional names in this list that are flashing here. So everybody understands motion picture studios and television companies, but in here we also now have a lot of new members, such as BT or Telstra, traditional telco companies, but they're now getting interested in the flowing of information because of some of the new areas in metadata and in interoperable mastering formats that the SMPTE has gone into. Some of the new technologies, perhaps in delivering over the top or video by non-traditional means, such as Amazon and Netflix. They're also new members of SMPTE on here as well. So it's basically anybody that's interested in quality moving images will find a home at SMPTE. The other area that we are very proud of is the fact that we have many student chapters around the world. We have about 600 student members total. And you know what? Think back before you went in and what excited you to be becoming an engineer and be involved in the motion picture industry if you're not an engineer. And it really comes back to what you learned at college. So this is our future right here. And it's getting earlier in the careers, taking a look at some of these areas here. So much so that we have decided to launch a new student film festival. We did dabble with it at the annual tech conference last year, but we're formalizing it now. It's designed to attract and creative use of technology. So we have a couple of different areas here that we're going to be looking at to giving awards for. We'll have a juried festival will take place this October during the annual technical conference in Hollywood, where we're going to actually have voting happening there and audience participation and prizes being awarded. So we do hope that you've had the pleasure of going to the annual tech conference or will plan to go to it, because this should be an exciting time, some new events that we have there as well. Now, obviously, education is a very important part of what we do, and that really is the main foundation, again, one of the main pillars of our society for that. So we have a very popular webcasting program that highlights our technologies. There's one as early as this Friday that talks about such great topics as fractional frame rates. And where did we come from decisions we made in the 1950s? That's one of them. We also have online virtual courses. We offer the CCNA training for networking, and we have a Fundamentals of Video over IP course, and we have a new one now for Ultra HD that's been coming out. And overall, it's an 8-week online course that hopefully will help bring up to today's technology, learn about this. And we have a digital library on top of all that. It brings all of our intellectual property to your desktop. You get access to that. You can research previous SMPTE documents, conference papers. And since 1916, we've done a lot of this work on this. And the Motion Imaging Journal really is the mainstay of our society. Right now, the Motion Imaging Journal is publishing 8 issues per year. We are working to increase that to 10 or possibly even 12 issues in the coming years, bringing more very interesting content to our members. So the other area, of course, is the conference calendar, which has been quite full, both in regional and in national conferences. Just like we have Bits by the Bay right here, right now. This is an example of all this. So whether it is a national event, an international event, whether we're part of another conference such as the NAB show in Vegas or the IBC in Amsterdam every year, SMPTE is providing leadership and education throughout that. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have the, in October, we have our annual technical conference that takes place in Hollywood. And it does bring over 2,000 people together. We have a special event this year, includes a Netflix-sponsored networking event. So Netflix-sponsored networking event. Hard to say that right in one word. I already mentioned the Student Festival, and the lead-in for the annual tech conference this year is a symposium on virtual reality. So it's more than 3 days of technical papers, more than 70 exhibitors, honors and awards ceremonies, and more. It should be a very exciting event. I've had the pleasure of going most of the last 15 years to these to the annual tech conference. It really is a great place. And I'm looking around the room, and there are actually several people in the room that are regular presenters at that conference. So back to standards. So standards is one of our founding pillars for this, and nothing stays the same. There's always about changing for that. We've moved them from the traditional images and sound area to more metadata and connectivity, and very recently into workflows as well. And basically, it's all about defining the quality of moving pictures anywhere in our imaging, whether it's the images themselves, whether it's the metadata that is about the data, whether it's how you connect these things together for interoperability or control, or even defining the workflow. It's all about interoperability and defining standards for that. And we've had several areas we've done this. We have digital cinema sound project. We had open binding technologies. We've had high dynamic range is a big popular new one after ultra high definition areas, high frame rate stuff, still working on video compression standards. And of course, we are moving to do new network-based synchronization, moving beyond the black burst now to go into the IP digital age of having synchronization using precision time protocol from IEEE 1588 and tying those all together through the plant. So it's a lot of work still to be done here, and the work is far from over in our industry. Here's an example of some of the recent group reports we've had here. Immersive audio, advertising identifier, just came out with new areas of standards in high dynamic range, which is fundamentally changing the quality of the immersive viewing experience. I myself will be talking a little bit about high dynamic range in my tutorial just before lunch. And we have several task forces that we're part of, network media, file formats, interoperable media formats, et cetera. So we are very, very, very moving through that. So we have over 600 participants from over 30 countries, 160 working groups. It's a lot of stuff. Okay, now let's look more to 2016. So what's going on? We've reached the century mark, 100 years we turn in 2016. Very few organizations can stake this claim. Never mind, really, we're a nonprofit professional association. It's very proud. The legacy of Jenkins and others in the society. We have a new logo, our 100-year logo. If you haven't seen it before, here it is, and celebrating that moving forward. The part of this, the milestone, the Board of Governors has started a Next Century Development Fund to help grow the society for the next 100 years. And very pleased to announce that we have some initial donors towards that. The Walt Disney Company, Panasonic, Dolby, and Technicolor, who have committed over $1.3 million in gifts to the society, specifically for this fund. This is in addition to everything else they've done. These types of companies or other companies that are for this. So we really want to thank these companies for their help. And then a couple other activities we're doing. We have, for the Centennial, we have a book that's going to be coming out, commemorative book to talk about, and a moving pictures or moving images documentary. Both will be telling the story of 100 years of the motion industry. And SMPTE is also being recognized with awards at this last joint technical Emmy ceremony that was held in January, SMPTE received the Philo Farnsworth Award for lifetime achievement to the industry from the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Very, very prestigious award for this. And Larry Thorpe, who could have been here, he's not, I don't see him anyway, a SMPTE fellow, received the Charles F. Jenkins Award right after the Academy gives an award out for the founder of SMPTE every year for someone who has a lifetime set of achievements for that, and congratulations to Mr. Thorpe for his efforts in that as well. So where are we going for the next 100 years? As I mentioned before, our executive director, Barbara Lang, likes to refer to SMPTE as a 100-year-old startup because everything is new and happening here. Let's think about this. I'm looking around the room here. Hard to believe that the modern smartphone as we know it, now there are smartphones a lot of times, but I'm talking about a smartphone where the primary entry was your finger on a large display. That wasn't until 2007 when Apple released the first iPhone. It wasn't the first smartphone, but that iPhone with the direct finger input really changed the world for how we've done that. Everybody now has smartphones today, sometimes multiples. I have 2 in the desk over there for me, so we're all geeks, right? And then something else happened. Just a couple of years after that, in 2010, Apple released its first iPad tablet. So the tablet computer, always in the subject of science fiction. You can go back to movies in the 1950s had tablets. Star Trek, for you Star Trek fans, they always had a tablet computer. But to actually realize it in that, it was really only a handful of years ago. And now, can you imagine what life would be like without tablets? I'm just, again, see everybody has multiple devices here. A lot of them are including smartphones and tablets. And it just didn't exist more than 10 years ago. In 1999, Netflix kicked off a subscription-based over-the-top service. Now it has over 60 million subscribers, and the world has changed yet again. So again, nothing is the same as it was, which is a good thing. And the SMPTE needs to be there to help the industry stay informed and keep standardizations for that. And we're very pleased to see companies like Netflix and Apple are SMPTE contributing members. So what are the top areas we're going into the research in? So Ericsson publishes a top 10 consumers hot trend, and the number one area in that is streaming video. It's the hottest trend for 2015. Before 2010, again, there were no tablet computers. So the idea of doing streaming video that you would just take for granted on your device and portable was just unthought of just 5 years ago. And it's not just Ericsson. Cisco estimates that by 2018, 70% of all internet traffic will be delivering motion images. So you can see where the growth aspect is for that. And there's been some recent news about this as well. So we probably just heard last week, or 2 weeks ago, I think it might have been, May 12th, so it's 2 weeks ago, that Verizon and AOL, it's all about mobile. Mobile is the magic word. Why would a big company like that pay so much for AOL? Because of the targeted advertising and the list that's for that. It's all about mobile. It's all about reaching and personalization for that. So at the end of the day, why are we sharing all this? Is what do the new players mean for traditional players? You either have to adapt or become irrelevant, and that's where SMPTE comes into play. So studios need to adapt. Fewer and fewer young people are going to the cinemas. Cinemas need to adapt because home entertainment is becoming bigger. Broadcasters need to adapt as over-the-top barriers are lowered. And now everybody basically can call themselves a broadcaster, as you've seen. Consumers are adapting to technology and growth through a variety of areas for that. And this is pretty much a nice poll here. It reveals a generational gap in media preferences. If you go all the way to the right, newspaper, print, or digital, you see those that are in the category of 68 or higher prefer newspaper, print, or digital. And if you go all the way over to the left, pay TV, the same thing. But if you start looking in the middle here, where streaming comes into play, it becomes younger and younger as strategies differ. And this is really where our future is what is driving it. It's all about mobile devices and areas of that. And television, as you know it, is now about the television viewing experience. It's not the physical device in the living room anymore. It's about viewing experience for that. So the word television itself, the name, is morphing. And obviously, since television is a center name within the SMPTE, it's very important for us. So in closing, and I didn't get the horn from Peter, but I know it was expected here. So SMPTE really does care about the quality of motion, imaging, sound. He's going to do it anyways just to be a pain. Our challenge is to remain relevant in an industry where the industry needs us. And so We've seen where this technology has taken us. It's through standardization and education that matters, and the social aspect through having membership in a society such as us. So recent efforts that we didn't even know just a couple of years would be of any interest are taking center stage in the SMPTE. High dynamic range, high frame rates, wide color gamuts, cinema audio, networking project, metadata, interoperable mastering formats. 5 years ago, none of this stuff was even thought about, and now it's a mainstay of what we're working on. So we look forward to a strong society, one that cares about the quality of motion, image, and sound for the best consumer experience, no matter what device it's on. And that's key about that, because again, television has changed in what it is. So hopefully everybody here is a member of SMPTE. If it's not, please consider joining. It'll impact your life in many ways. We've just heard from Bruce, background and mayor of this fine city, but also a traditionalist in the area of SMPTE as well. And that should just show you how this organization can truly make a life impact on you. And I want to thank you again for allowing me to represent the society here for your conference. And let's thank you very much and enjoy the conference for the rest of the day.